In 2015, Pope Francis released his encyclical letter Laudato Si, which was perhaps the first encyclical letter in the history of the Church to be celebrated by the secular world. Yes, celebrated, and still is celebrated by the forces of secularism today. Laudato Si was the first encyclical of his papacy. Not the first released, but the first credited solely to Pope Francis. The prior encyclical, Lumen Fide, released in 2013, was started under Benedict XVI, and in hindsight is clearly by Benedict or his ghostwriter for the most part, as it focused not on material worldly concerns, but rather on issues related to the faith. Whether it's a good encyclical, I guess, depends on the point of view of the reader, but Laudato Si accomplished at least one thing. It forged an alliance between the children of darkness and the hierarchy of the Church. It cracked the door open for the strangest figures imaginable to be seen regularly as guests at the Vatican, including specialists on thermometer and weather issues, specialists on population, industry, and all sorts of other figures that no one would have expected to see at the Vatican. Since that time, we've seen those figures very regularly at the Holy See, with the Vatican being the home of some major conferences on various issues that seem to have little to do with Catholicism and more to do with concerns of Caesar. Even the present situation hasn't disrupted this activity to any real degree. This week has seen a flurry of activity on all things green at the Vatican, building on the momentum of the latest encyclical Tutti Frutti, or whatever it was actually called. The work for building the utopia on earth continues instead of spreading the traditional gospel, and that is evident by a conference that was meeting in Francis's homeland to prepare for a later one a little further north this coming November of this year, but getting its initial kickoff this week. For this week, we go to the American outlet that has historically been big fans of Francis, Crux magazine, which professes to be taking the Catholic pulse. Headline: Pope warns against ideological elites at launch of Latin American Assembly. The piece is written by someone calling themselves Inez San Martin on January 25th, 2021. Quoting the piece from Crux. On Sunday, the Catholic Church in Latin America launched a consultation process that involves not only the hierarchy but also the laity, and Pope Francis reminded those taking part that an elite illumined by one ideology or another is not the Church. This ecclesial assembly cannot be an elite separated from the holy, faithful people of God, said Francis, in a video message sent to the online presentation of the Ecclesial Assembly of Latin America and the Caribbean. End quote. He goes on to remind everyone that all are welcome, which has been a running theme of his, especially lately, to the point where he is now rejecting what the Church has said about figures like Luther and Calvin, and having even included their followers into the fold of the flock, despite the Church previously having some rather harsh and infallible-sounding words to the contrary on that issue. But then Francis goes to invoke the spirit of something called Aparecida, which if you are not aware what that was, Aparecida was a conference in the early part of the Benedict papacy on what would later be Laudato Si type issues, all things green and thermometer and weather related. Francis, then Cardinal Bergoglio, has been at this for a long time. Quoting Crux again, quote, the Pope's words were made public on Sunday during the presentation of the first regional assembly that aims at quote-unquote reviving the spirit of Aparecida, the landmark 2007 regional meeting of the Conference of Bishops for Latin America and the Caribbean, or CELAM, C-E-L-A-M. The assembly launched on Sunday will take place November 21st to 28th, 2021 in Mexico City, and has a quote-unquote synodal character, as it is a convocation to lay men and women, religious, deacons, seminarians, priests, bishops, and cardinals, with the scope of, quote, marking a milestone in the journey of the missionary disciples of our continent, end quote. So, another synod, but this one is not in Rome, but in Latin America. And it will be following and folding the concepts of Laudato Si and Tutti Frutti, or whatever it was called, into the mission of the Church, with its mantra of human fraternity, and the rest of it is part of the mission going forward. Here's some context on Aparecida and what it was founded for. And yes, this stuff is all important if you really want to know what you're going to be hearing in your parish later this year. It was initially founded, set in the backdrop of the rising tide, we're talking Aparecida here, of liberation theology before the council. Bear that in mind as I cite this older piece from Alatea on the matter. This comes from an article in 2017 that celebrated the 10th anniversary of the conference in Aparecida that was cited in the Crooks article. Quote, Pope Pius XII approved the creation of the Episcopal Council of Latin American Bishops, again CELAM, in 1955, and 3 years later established the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. Pope Paul VI became the first pope ever to visit Latin America in 1968. During his visit, he officially opened CELAM's second General Conference, held in Colombia. CELAM has a permanent secretariat located in Bogota and an executive body selected by and among the Latin American bishops. The chosen members meet annually to reflect on issues facing the continent and discern how to face those challenges as a united church. General conferences, which include all of the continent's bishops, have been held 5 times. The most recent was in Aparecida, Brazil, in 2007. It was opened by Pope Benedict XVI in a visit to that country and has been seen as a coming-of-age moment for the Church in Latin America. The 5th CELAM General Conference was characterized by open conversations and honest reflection based on issues and needs that truly reflected the reality of life in Latin America. Then Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio took part in the Aparecida Conference and was chosen by his peers to lead the committee that would draft the concluding document for the conference. That document, referred to as the Aparecida document, has come to be seen as a roadmap the entire church can use. One of its main tenets is the call for a continental mission, a church that goes out in search of ways to proclaim the gospel to all. In that document, the Latin American bishops expressed what they believed to be keys to keeping the gospel message alive and relevant in Latin America: helping each Christian have a personal encounter with Christ, living with simplicity and humility taught in the gospel, a preferential option for the poor, a serious concern for the environment, prayer, especially popular cultural devotions, end quote. That article goes on to include mention of Marian devotion and the like, and generally sounds positive until you understand the influence of the former Franciscan, Leonardo Boff, and others. And as an aside, I referenced Boff in a recent video, I think last week, and called him a Jesuit, and that was an error. He was a Franciscan. But anyway, he has been given a voice for liberation theology and has been doing that work his whole life, which is where the preferential option for the poor comes from, a thoroughly post-Vatican II concept if there ever was one. The faith has always taught that spiritual poverty was the ideal, involuntary giving away our earthly goods to follow Christ, not a strange idolatry of destitution. But let's continue, because as we can see, this isn't the only activity like this in the Church today. On a similar note, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's chief diplomat, spoke to a body of thermometer and weather experts and preached the gospel of Laudato Si to them, reminding them that despite everything going on in the so-called good news of Laudato Si must continue, and the work it inspires must absolutely continue moving forward. He reminded everyone that the weather and thermometer issues related to pollution were issues that affect everyone, and he is right to a degree, though of course the urgency of those issues should be more hotly debated than they seem to be. Thus is the nature of how these things work. There is an accepted reality promoted by the experts, and any contradictory opinions aren't even heard. The Vatican is fully on board, and has been, since 2015 at least, with the rise of the Laudato Si message. The Vatican News article I'm pulling this from specifically cites Laudato Si as its inspiration, and that document has been the driving force of the reign of Francis since it was announced in 2014. Which, in closing, brings us back to Francis's words to his assembly. Don't be an elitist. Given that the Vatican has been the home of elites for some time, that's pretty rich, this is in fact nothing wrong with elites and relying on elites and experts to solve problems. There's literally nothing wrong with that. The preferred ruling system of the Church is and always has been monarchy, and that system has always been the most elite-friendly imaginable. The Church endorses nobility, but Francis is on the one hand telling the hierarchy to not act like elites when having their synod this fall, which sounds like it's going to be the, 6th General Aparecida-style assembly, and he's saying this stuff while simultaneously being cozy with the modern specialists and elites, and not giving contrary arguments any room at all. Again, that's pretty rich. Call it the new clericalism if you want, for that term certainly fits better than they'd ever want to admit. So be ready for more green talk from the Church. If you're still going to the typical neighborhood parish instead of making the drive to a traditional parish of some kind, you're going to end up hearing homilies or messages from Francis from the pulpit explicitly on this issue later this year. You heard it here first. The mission and gospel of Laudato Si will be preached, for that message is at least part of the message of the ape of the Church, that utopia can and will be crafted on earth. It's coming, so you best be ready for that. So what are your thoughts on this? The hierarchy is getting back to business as usual, which I guess in some ways is good, though I'd have hoped that 2020 would have taught them the need to focus on the traditional gospel more and the concerns of Caesar a little less. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and all that jazz. As always, pray for the church. Thanks for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.